Hi, welcome back to Viet Film Fest. If you're watching this, you have just watched Storms and Silver Linings, which is our intended set for high school students and secondary school students. But of course, as I said earlier, it is intended for just about anybody. And what we have here now is a Q&A session with filmmakers from all six of the US virtual version of Storms and Silver Linings. I'm very happy to be joined by all of them. I was wondering if we could start with Brandon of Conversations to the Register and just go around in alphabetical order by film and just introduce ourselves by name, our position on the film, and the film that we were involved with. Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hey, everyone, my name is Brandon. I am the co-director for Conversations at the Register, and yeah, happy to be here with everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Nell. I'm the director of Good Chips.
Hi, my name is Bridget Mai Kang Lee, and I'm the co-writer and co-producer of Good Chips.
Hi, my name is Malin, and I was the writer and director for Hyphen.
Hey everyone, my name is Wing Winley. I'm the director and was in the documentary In Living Memory.
Hi, my name is Mai. I'm the director of Serene Rotary. Really nice to meet you.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Dominic Teo. I'm one of the co-directors of The Waves Now Calm and also co-directed by Quattrin, who unfortunately can't be with us today.
Okay, thank you all, everybody, for joining me today. We're going to start rather simply with a round of group questions. Beginning with Brandon, I was wondering if everybody could tell me what inspired you to make your film.
Yeah, so my co-director Lan and I grew up in Cambodia town, and we used this film to basically write like a love letter to our community. In the case of KH Market, which is the grocery store that was covered in our film, they've served the community for decades. They were a space of social gathering where folks could, meet one another and also get essential Cambodian and Southeast Asian ingredients. So we just wanted to document like the love of our community, um, and also just highlight the mobilization of our community against gentrification. Um, Even though KH Market isn't here today, we hope that, our film could be kind of like a memory for folks who remembered the store, for something to reminisce back on, and for future generations who may not know what KH Market is. We hope that our film can also, when they watch it, they could kind of see how, Cambodia Town used to be back then in maybe like 10 or 20 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, for Good Chips, I was researching for another project. I was looking at all these old kind of newsreel footages from Ireland in the 70s and the 80s, and I came across this interview with one of the refugees who came over in 1979 from the Vietnam War, and it was their daughter who had this really thick North Dublin accent, and it was just brilliant. And she was talking about how she had met her Irish boyfriend, and I just knew I wanted to write a story just around this character alone. And also, what inspired me to make the film is Bridget and I were we were in this POC artist group at the time called Weft Studio, and I knew I really wanted to work with her and that she could bring this project to a whole other level. So that kind of inspired me to make it as well.
Yeah, what Nell said. So Nell approached me with the idea for this project around this character. And my mom, she is from Vietnam, and she was one of the boat people that she went to the United States. And I moved to Ireland 9 years ago now to pursue a master's degree in public history and cultural heritage. And my project surrounded the Vietnamese boat people who arrived in Ireland and how they commemorate the Vietnam War. And so I had established a relationship with the Vietnamese community here. And so when Nell approached me with this, I was like, this is a match made in heaven. This is a story that I really want to tell. So that's what inspired me as well.
For Hyphen, it was actually based on personal experience. So Hyphen for like coming out to my family, which is already a big like obstacle in general. I actually don't speak Vietnamese, so when I had to come out to like my grandmother, it actually had to come from the mouth of someone else, which happened to be like my mom or my other family members. And so navigating that was a very interesting experience, and I didn't realize at the time, because it's just been my whole life of like I've never had a real conversation with my grandmother. For the most part, like it's always through someone else. I realized in college that that was a very unique experience. So I took the core events of what happened and like very much dramatized them for Hyphen. But that's what inspired me to make the film, is to explore the themes of language barriers and coming out in a second generation family to like an older generation of the family.
For In Living Memory, I have been thinking about making a film about my mom's nail salon for years. I actually started making an experimental film maybe in 2017, and then I shelved it because I just had a lot of, I guess, unprocessed emotions about the nail salon, what it meant to me personally, similar to Maitland, kind of like the language barrier, being a translator, having been there, kind of guilt around my mother's work and what it allowed me to do, like be a filmmaker. And I just have like a lot of stuff. But I always knew I wanted to do it. And then when COVID happened and she just shut down her salon forever very suddenly, I don't know. I just had a sense that I was like, okay, I think I have to film this. And so it actually took another couple of years since 2020 for us to kind of piece the story together. Part of it is because of the pandemic and trying to I guess, figure out how to tell a story about a place that already shut down. And yeah, that's what inspired me, just my upbringing in the salon.
For Spring Road Dream, I guess there's two things that inspire the film. The first thing is how much I actually miss Vietnamese food when I moved to the UK. I just for the context, I was born and I grew up in Vietnam, and I moved to the UK for the film school. And the second thing is my dad. So ever since I moved to the UK, it's almost like every film I made, the, there will be like an image of my dad in some characters in one ways or another. And I feel like there's a longing within me that I need to tell the story of these characters who's a Vietnamese dad, who's kind of like being pushed to the side when his children and grandchildren is like growing up in a Western cultures, and like kept like forgetting him, and couldn't really connect with him, which is like slightly based on my family as well. So I sat down with my team and we just like say a lot about how we feel our connection with our families, and we want to tell a story that specific to Vietnamese culture, but also very relatable in different cultures. And that's how Spring Roll come into the creation. Yeah.
So with The Waves Now Calm, I think I wanted to look at the Vietnamese refugee crisis, but more through a personal lens. So I was born and raised in Malaysia, but I haven't actually heard about Bidong Island, which was the Vietnamese refugee camp, until I actually went to the US to study, and that's where I met Kwa, my co-director and a good friend. And actually, it was through his parents, they started telling me about these places that were, very specific, and you wouldn't know it as an average American. And only later I realized, or I found out that, they had passed through Malaysia after fleeing Vietnam. So, I was aware of the Vietnam War and all that, but I'd never actually known as a Malaysian that we actually, took in all these refugees and had this whole island as a refugee camp. So for me, the motivation was, once I graduated and came back to Malaysia, I really just wanted to go and see the place and talk to people there, see if it was part of, still part of people's memory today. But one thing that really struck me was, like Kwa and his family really, in a way, felt like home for me when I was in the US. Like I was on the other end of the world, but, they were Vietnamese, I was Malaysian, we spoke different languages, all that. But a lot of the culture felt familiar. And looking at them, you just think, they're just an average American family. But when you really look at, the context of, everything they've been through to get to where they are, I think it really spoke to, how well people can do if they're given a chance, right? I think we've talked about terms like the boat people, which in this context, it's people fleeing Vietnam. But for me, growing up, the boat people refer to the Rohingya refugees fleeing Myanmar. So there's kind of that cyclical nature of like migration and people fleeing persecution. So for me, I kind of just wanted to take all these big things, but just really make something very simple and small to kind of process all these thoughts. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dominique, and thank you everybody for answering that first question. So I wanted to ask now, and going in reverse order this time, how did your cultural heritage influence your artistry, whether that's Vietnamese, Cambodian, Philippine Irish, or Malaysian? Starting with Dominique and going in reverse order.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Um, I don't know about like artistic influence, but I think there was just a whole lot of different kind of cultural influences. And I think that's one thing that was really kind of nice for me to discover through this whole project was, growing up, I think if you grow up in one country, you tend to think of this, your identity kind of restricted within that, geographical bound. But I think having moved myself to the US and then, meeting Kwa and learning about, all these like international crises and realizing how interconnected things were, I think it really gave me the sense of, like a Southeast Asian identity. That things like national identity are very like new, very modern. That boundaries are actually very fluid and very subjective. So I think in terms of how it influenced the film, I think it's just kind of interesting to look at it through that. So that's why we had the fisherman. So I kind of wanted to capture the, the Malaysian, local Malaysian lens, but also, Kwan's family as the people kind of going through it and people having gone through it and come out on the other end. Yeah, and it's also, things like looking at the languages that people speak, right? So even if you come together to celebrate Thanksgiving, how the older generation might speak more Vietnamese and the younger generation might speak more English. And it's something I see in Malaysia as well, where, if you're, ethnic Chinese descent, you might speak more Mandarin if you're an older generation, and the younger kids kind of speak more English. I think it's just kind of, it's the whole melting pot idea, and there's so many layers, and when you compound that by the different nationalities and national identities. Yeah, so I don't know if I answered the question, but there's just a lot of things that were kind of floating in my head.
No, that was a good answer. Thank you, Dominique. Mai, go ahead.
I guess I grew up in Vietnam, so I lived like 27 years in Vietnam, and not until I moved to the UK that I realized how Vietnamese I actually am. Um, and I, in terms of filmmaking, I actually don't think too hard on how um I I have my Vietnamese heritage within my films. I guess I usually just like try to build the characters and tell the story of the characters as authentic as I see it is. And because I am a Vietnamese, so my story, my perspective, it just naturally it has all the elements. Um, and one of the things I explore in my filmmakings is that when I make a story about my Vietnamese perspective, and most of them are about family, about relationship, about how people connect with each other, and like the Vietnamese-ness is almost is in how we express ourselves, what we choose to eat, how we connect to each other, and by telling the differences, I actually receive I actually learn how what is the similarity between me and the audience in different cultures, and I find the element that feel like most relatable in storytelling, which is like in whichever cultures, like our desire to connect with our parents are all the same, and like wanting to love and to have the best for the next generations, all the same. So that's the basis of my filmmaking. Yeah.
Because I was born in the US, so I consider myself second generation. My parents were refugees of the Vietnam War. So I was born in California, and I think similarly to a lot of people, our kind of knowledge of ourselves and where we come from is largely informed by, uh, I would say, the wave of war films from the 1980s. Um, a lot of Hollywood, American produced films, images, um, just as one of the most televised wars in history. A lot of that came like secondhand, so it didn't come from people who experienced it from maybe the Vietnamese side. Um, and so when I started filmmaking, I think I was searching for a relationship with my Vietnamese-ness. Also being queer, I had felt kind of distant from it growing up. And so, yeah, so it influences my artistry in the sense that I want to express something very specific about how I see the world, but also kind of a searching for um, like what felt like a genuine relationship to Vietnamese-ness, which I do feel strongly now. But I think when I started making films, it was because of that curiosity about how do I, as a second generation Vietnamese American queer person, um, experience Vietnamese-ness, especially because that is informed usually by either American media or by the limits of my family members who they themselves are not the authority, right, of the entire culture, but a lot of us in the diaspora, we sort of depend um, on our family members to be the authority. Anyway, that's a long-winded question, but I think it has kind of, I don't know, it's just like Maya was saying, it's just all-encompassing of everything I do because I'm Viet.
For Hyphen, I really feel like the film wouldn't be what it is without like my Vietnamese heritage and like my experience growing up straddling both being Vietnamese and American through like school, but also like Vietnamese through family. And like I feel like it really gives it the heartbeat of the film because it's not only like using the language as like a narrative tool to like withhold information from like my main character, but also like in our production design, just everything that we were like thinking of when we were coming up with like visual references and like for like especially for like the music is that we were like, how can we make this feel like wherever you watch it, you're in a house in Orange County in like Westminster with our characters. And so it's like when it comes to like the colanders, the food on the table, like we had bun sao and ganjul on the table, or like the for one of the scenes when we're meeting like all the characters, I literally told my composer, I'm like, who is Vietnamese, so she got the reference. But I was like, I really want like Vietnamese EDM in the back, like what you hear in like the supermarkets, to just be pulsing throughout the house. And so it's just, I feel like through every like discipline that we were doing with like the filmmaking process, we were like, how can we intertwine like not only my experience as a Vietnamese American, because a lot of my crew were Vietnamese American too, like how can we all intertwine our experiences through like the narrative tools that we're using. And so as we were doing that, I really feel like it gives the heartbeat and really helps build the world of Hyphen, because we also have a virtual production section with like green screen and like the Unreal Engine. And all the visual references and comps for that was like, we can't fly to Vietnam to shoot this, so let's make it virtually. And we use like the abalone panels that are usually like hung out around like Vietnamese American houses as like references for that. So just like stuff like that, we were just trying to intertwine through the whole approach for making Hyphen.
Yeah, Good Chips was such a interesting personal experience for me in terms of my own identity, because I'm mixed race Vietnamese and my dad is Irish American and my mom is from Vietnam, and I grew up in Orange County, California. So moving to Ireland was eye-opening for me, because I had almost taken my Vietnamese culture for granted until I was taken out of it. And Orange County has such a vibrant Vietnamese population, that, like, being able to go get Vietnamese food and speak to Vietnamese people and see my family, that was all, taken from me. And so when I moved to Ireland and I decided my research project for my master's degree was going to be researching this group, I sought out the Vietnamese boat people who had come here, and I forged a really close relationship with a family who came here originally. They opened one of the first Vietnamese restaurants in Ireland, and I became really close with them, and I was a bridesmaid in their daughter's wedding. And so when this film came around, it was challenging for me, because as the Vietnamese person with their name on this project, I felt a lot of pressure to make the film as authentic as possible and to really accurately portray the Vietnamese Irish story. So I really relied on my mom and also my friends, and it was a real like soul-searching experience in a way to have to navigate my Vietnameseness on my own without my family here, and to be the Vietnamese authority on this film. So yeah, it was really, really fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm Filipino Irish. I'm like Bridget, I'm mixed, and I'm originally from a very rural part of Ireland. So I think as someone who's always felt like an outsider, I tend to be drawn to stories about outsiders. So and there really isn't. There's very, very, very few Asian film directors in general in Ireland. It's quite a wide industry. So I think just to be able to bring that experience, even though it wasn't Vietnamese, or like I'm not Vietnamese, but I think there is still common ground to be had in being an outsider. And I think what's helpful about being mixed race is that you have a lot of empathy for lots of different experiences. And this is a film about a 13-year-old Vietnamese girl and a 13-year-old Irish boy. And it's the fact that they come from such different backgrounds, but find out that they have so much in common was a really beautiful story to tell. And I think encouraging empathy and encouraging us to kind of see the things that we have in common as opposed to the things that make us different was something that was very special about this story, and something I tried to draw on from my own experience as well.
So I'm second generation Cambodian American in the US. Growing up, I was kind of like not proud to be Cambodian, or I always tried to kind of keep that part of me, um, hidden. I think it wasn't until I went to college and left home, um, was that I took like my community and my background for granted. So, in a lot of ways, my artistry and filmmaking is a a healing journey for me. Um, Documenting the experiences of folks that I know in my community, um, highlighting their stories of resilience and prosperity really allowed me to um, be more connected with my community and culture. And um, in the case of me being Cambodian, it allowed me to really become more in tune with myself and my identity. And even within a Southeast Asian background too, I know that with um, my co-director Lan, she identifies as a second generation Vietnamese American, but she grew up in Cambodia town like I did. So we really do have a lot of pride in our community. And as two people who grew up in Long Beach and are members of the Cambodian community in Long Beach, we really want to approach our film in the way that we try to tell it with as much trust and respect as possible to make it as authentic as possible and give the people in our film and our community the all due respect.
All right, thank you all for that second round of group questions. I'm going to go on to individualized film questions now, beginning with conversations at the register, and then work our way down. Brandon, this set is intended for a younger audience. I'm wondering if you could tell us what gentrification is and what is the status of Long Beach's the gentrification in Cambodia town.
Yeah, gentrification is a really hard thing to define. It could be, we could go down like a whole like lengthy process of it, but in my terms, gentrification is the process of most oftentimes wealthy people and businesses, often corporations, moving into lower income neighborhoods and displacing the folks who have lived there for decades. And a lot of what disappears is the community, the culture, and just the whole atmosphere of what makes that neighborhood that neighborhood. In the case of Cambodia town, unfortunately, over the past years, a lot of corporations and new businesses have moved in, and they've displaced a lot of the small mom and pop Cambodian, Vietnamese, Southeast Asian ethnic businesses. So, they're no longer here, and we see like a lot of new development happening. We see, fast food places opening up. We see, like all these big grocery chains opening up. So really, there's not really spaces for a lot of Cambodian folks to congregate and, um, get the foods or the products or anything that they really like connect with or they identify with anymore. So there's that really just like loss of sense of home and identity that's been going on. But at the same time too, what's come out of it is that me and a lot of older and younger residents of Cambodia town have seen what's going on, and we really want to stop it. And a lot of organizations have mobilized. One of them being Cambodia Town Thrives that we covered in the film. We really want to, buy back the block and preserve our community for decades, for generations to come. So, we're not going down without a fight. So that's the good that came out of it.
Thank you, Brandon. Brandon, in addition, may I ask why KH Market was chosen as the subject for your film as opposed to some other business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so before conversations at the register, Lan and I had another short film that preceded it. It was our student short film called Cambodia Town Not for Sale. And that was back in 2018, 2019, when we first heard the news of East Anaheim Plaza getting demolished and gentrified. And KH Market is in East Anaheim Plaza. That's one of the biggest shopping centers in central Cambodia town. And in our film, we were able to cover a few other small mom and pop businesses, like a Chinese herbal store, a Chinese food restaurant, Chinese Cambodian owned restaurant. And we really wanted to cover KH Market in the first film, but with everything going on, we weren't able to give them a proper story. So when fast forward to a couple years later, when we heard that they were kind of closing down for good, an org called United Cambodian Community reached out to us, and they wanted us to kind of create like a tribute / memorial piece for KH Market, highlighting their service to the community. So that's how conversations at the register came out of it.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. I move on now to Team Good Chips here. Bridget and Nell, how did you both meet, and what was your artistic collaboration like during the making of your film?
Do you want to take that one, Bridget?
I was going to say, do you want to take that one now? As Nell mentioned before, we met in this initiative for POC artists called West Studio, and it was an initiative of Dublin Fringe Festival, which supports up and coming artists, performing and performing artists. So yeah, we came together, and the artistic collaboration was really like fantastic. We were able to do a lot of research together, and writing with Nell has been such a pleasure, and it was a really great learning experience, I think, for both of us. I don't think we had co-written anything before. Nell, have you?
Yeah.
No.
First time.
Yeah. So it was really fantastic, and especially because Nell has already had a couple short films under her belt. So it was a great learning experience for me as well, how to make a short film. And so yeah, it was really, really great learning experience for me too.
Nell, do you want to answer any part of that question, or did you want to go into the
Yeah, just to echo what Bridget said, like Bridget was just, from day one, has just been the most amazing collaborator, and I think we really do work as a good little tag team. And Bridget wasn't just involved in script stage, like she was very much involved in production and on set, and working with the kids especially. Bridget was great. Like anytime I had to go do camera bits or anything like that, Bridget was there with the kids, getting them ready, and just they, the performances speak for themselves. Those kids were brilliant, and any kind of rehearsals and stuff, Bridget was very much involved. And then when we were in post, like, yeah, it was very important to get it right and to make it feel authentic. And I just can't imagine doing this project without Bridget. Honestly, she just made it 100 times better. So yeah, it's been great, and we're still working together today. So it's been great to find a lifelong collaborator through this process as well.
Glad to hear. And as for the kids, they're very central to the telling of Good Ships. How did you cast both your child leads, and how did you build their on-screen rapport?
Yeah, so I always work with a casting director. So Anya O'Sullivan was our casting director, and she helped find Zach in particular, the boy. But it was actually Bridget who found Ellie. And I'd say, Bridget, you probably want to tell that story, do you?
Yeah, as you may not know, Ireland is a very small country, so this is a very Irish story. Someone always knows someone in order for things to happen. And I had remembered that about 7 or 8 years ago, I had a temporary job as a receptionist in a law firm one summer. And I remembered that one of my colleagues had a daughter that he had adopted from Vietnam, 2 daughters. And I did the math in my head, and I was like, oh, she would be about the right age. And so I just cold called, reached out to him and asked, would his daughter be interested in acting? And, we have this short film coming up. And he came back and was like, not only is my daughter the right age, she's also an actress. She's done loads of stage productions. And so that was such a fantastic find. Ellie was absolutely brilliant. She had never done film or TV on-screen work before, and she really took to it so well. She was a complete professional. So really, really great to find Ellie, and also her little sister Una plays her little sister in the film as well.
All right, thank you to Team Good Chips. We go to Mei Lin now. Hyphen was your senior graduation film from Chapman, and I'm just wondering, what were the most important lessons you learned while at Chapman's film program that you applied to Hyphen, whether it was cinematic, personal, or technical?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot, but I think one of the most important is learning how to take personal experience and run with it, form a story with it that like it's beyond my personal experience now. Like I always say that the events that happen in Hyphen are very special and unique to the Hyphen family. Like it's started from here and then it went somewhere else. And just learning to package everything into a very like digestible form and like use all the technical like skills, like whether it be like cine or PD and sound specifically, to just really tie all the narrative elements together and all to really like have every frame, every choice push the story forward. I think that was the most important thing I learned from Chapman, but also to like, spoiler alert, Chapman, there's not a lot of Vietnamese people. And so it was very interesting to like pitch, because we have to pitch the stories and everything to get approved for thesis. And so it was very much like seeing how like a non-Vietnamese community would take the story and how they would understand it. And so one of the big things, for example, that was a conversation point in like throughout the year for class, they were like, are you going to do subtitles or no subtitles? And when I wrote it with the intention of subtitles, mostly because like I don't speak Vietnamese. And so like that was like a whole thing of like, I want to make sure that like no matter what background you come from, you can see every viewpoint of the story, because there's like one scene where like the mom and the grandma have a conversation about Ray, the main character, who had just come out, and like if that whole scene's in Vietnamese, so if it wasn't subtitled and you don't understand Vietnamese, you just don't know what they would have said, which is true to real life because I don't know what happened during that real conversation. So it was just like my perspective on that. But I think it's really important for context to like for the like in that specific situation for the whole film to be subtitled so people could understand that. And yeah, so it's like learning how to package the whole film, but also like balance people who know Vietnamese like culture and also not Vietnamese culture was something I really learned throughout making Hyphen, through just like passing it around school to like friends and professors.
And that communication challenge obviously is central to your movie. I'm wondering if you had a message for younger Vietnamese people who might not be fluent in the language for whatever reason, who might want to better communicate to their elders.
Yeah, so for me, I feel like, well, one, just because you can't speak Vietnamese doesn't mean that you're not Vietnamese at all. That's something that I had to learn growing up. And because like there's so many things that are ingrained in experience and nonverbal that I feel like is not really talked about enough. And so like that's what helped me feel more Vietnamese American was like, yeah, well, I know the food and like, hey, like I know, I know like my family's background and like when I go back to Vietnam, they're like, oh wow, you're so American. I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it though. I can at least eat the food. But like stuff like that is just like really making like even if you can't have a conversation, there's other ways to bond with people. Like for example, like one of the main nonverbal actions that I have and like kind of like a narrative through line with the main character and her grandma is fruit picking. So like they have a jujube tree in their backyard. They're picking jujubes and like those scenes are basically silent. It's just the character and her grandma like existing together, but you can see through like the just the way that they like even if they do like say something, it's just like the tone, the warmness of like their how they exist around each other is really important. And like one of my favorite scenes in Hyphen is when um Ray tries to use fruit as a visual metaphor for coming out to her grandma and like trying to like physically act like it out between fruits. But then she gets frustrated and she sits down and her grandma just leaves. And so she thinks that like, oh, like she's like her grandma just like left to go do something else, but then she comes back with cut up fruit and they just sit in silence and eat fruit together. And even though they can't understand what's going on, like the grandma knows that something's wrong and this is her way of comforting her. So just stuff like that is that like initiating just active moments to experience things together that aren't nonverbal is my advice. If you want to connect with the older generation, that's how it worked for me personally.
Okay, thank you, Maylin. And we go to, I know you don't consider yourself this, Gwen, but you are a grizzled veteran of VIF now. You have been to a lot of editions of it. I wanted to start off, how did your mother react when you let her know that you wanted to make this film?
So if you're related to me or my friend, you'll probably be somehow brought into my projects. That's just what happens when you have no resources and no money. You depend on the people around you. So when I first started making films, you know, my my parent. So for one of my first films, my parents lent me their garage, and we built like a set in there. So my mom has always sort of witnessed filmmaking, kind of like in and around. And when we were trying to do that experimental piece, um, yeah, she was kind of like, sure. Um, and actually, something I realized when we were making it is that my mom doesn't understand editing. Like, she thinks that anything that you film, you just go the whole way through. So actually, I filmed her doing a manicure, and I was like, okay, can we skip ahead to the other part? And she was like, I can't skip. You want people to think I'm out? Like, you think I'm like not doing it right? Like, my customers are gonna think that that I don't do a good job, right? So I think because I had started working with her so long ago that when we made a documentary, which is a little bit more straightforward, less acting involved, right? Like I'm just sort of following her. I might ask her to stand somewhere and pose and stuff, but by then I think she understood like what I'm doing more or less. And so I don't know. I think as I said before, filmmaking was a way for me to connect with being Viet, but it also allowed me to connect with my parents as an adult. I think it's by getting involved in projects and doing creative stuff together. That's like one way that we can have a connection. And I learned a lot about my mom, but I'll end the question there. She was down for it. Because also it was pandemic. It's just kind of like, I don't work at the salon 7 days a week anymore. What am I supposed to be doing? So
Quinn, I don't think I've ever told you this, but Nook was one of the first films I ever saw at VIFF. That was way back in VIFF 2017. And I'm wondering, and this may sound a little valedictory, I don't mean it to sound this way, but how's your filmmaking since Nook affected what you've become as a person, an artist, and vice versa?
Oh, thank you. So Nuke, Water Homeland was my first sort of film outside of college. So it was like when I graduated, I was like, I'm just gonna show off, I guess, in a way, and tell people or show people what I can do, what I think. And that film has nail salon bits in it. And so that was a narrative scripted film that is based on real life. Actually, a lot of people accidentally call it a documentary, but it's not. It's definitely scripted. And yeah, since then I've become a documentary filmmaker. I used to despise the idea of being a documentary filmmaker. It sounded gendered and racist to me that people would only care about my filmmaking if it was me reporting about mostly about my community, or that was my viewpoint back then. Like I thought I had a lot to say personally. Um, but since then, I think it's become maybe less centered on me and my ability to show people what I think and more about listening to the people I'm making films about. So I think that's I don't, a difference. It's still the same topic in many ways. So in Nook is about a young queer person wondering about their mom's experience with the Vietnam War, right? And then years later, I make a documentary about my own mom and I'm in it. It's kind of similar. I think they're different expressions of a similar thing. Um, but but yeah, I don't know. I've become a documentary filmmaker. That's the simplest answer.
And a VIF regular by this point. Thank you, Quinn. We go to I don't recall the last time I saw a stop motion animation work at VIF. May I ask you, can you share with us your background in stop motion? And do you have any animated cinema influences on your work?
Sure. I started quite humbly in my bedroom when I was 19. Yeah, I was living in Saigon back then. And yeah, and I just like starting making film with clay and with old cameras that I have and I like a table lamp and just like shooting like the most roughly looking type of film ever. But like one of the film I actually applied to one of the festival called Cine FF, which is a online film festival in Vietnam. In order to encourage the young filmmakers, sort of like there's a during the time where I was starting making film, there's a wave of young filmmakers in Vietnam that we started to make a lot of film in more like a young generation perspective of filmmaking. Um, and I just like it's kind of like a start for me to keep on making stop motion film, which I went on to work on a startup studio, and we made a stop motion animated series, which called "Say Hi to Pencil," and it went on for 3 years, and it was a very tough experience for me because like for very young filmmakers like making a TV series like we have kind of have to learn everything by ourselves and we were always behind deadline. But I learned a lot from the experience of what it's like to be a filmmaker, like what it is to tell a story and how to make a story relatable to people. Anyways, the series went on for 3 years, and afterwards, it's ended, and I carry on with like providing stop motion work for commercial TV advertisement, which about the time when like stop motion start to become more popular in Vietnam. Stop motion is a very old traditional technique, but in Vietnam it's also relatively new, and it's like kind of like coming back into fashion. So it's become quite uh, rather popular in medias in Vietnam at the time. But like making commercial isn't really my passion, so I feel like I need to make a change. That's why I applied to a film school in the UK, and uh, uh, in a directing course. So with directing, so animation directings, we are encouraged to use different techniques of animation, not just stop motion, like 2D hand drawn, um, uh, 3Ds, and mixed stop motion, puppetry, live actions. But like when I make my graduation film, like stop motion is still the most authentic to me. Well, when I feel like I have like total control, um, it's just to add a bit, like I'm the most introvert type of people, as well. So like with stop motion, you don't, and animation in general, you don't have to work with a whole film crew um, at the same time. Yeah, we can. I still work with a crew, but I can just like work with them one at a time, so it feels so much more relaxed. But at the same time, the animation went on for like 8 months, so it was very uh physically taxing process. Um, and I had stop motion was also gave me a bit of play of like textures, and modelings, and we use the texture of papers to construct most of the look of the film, which I feel like is really add to the story, um, sort of like a sense of fragility within the story and a vulnerability, which is the story, what the story is about how to open up to each other and reconnect. So yeah, that's
Okay.
my journey with stop motion.
Thank you, Mike. And lastly,
Yeah.
did you have any influences in
Oh,
animated cinema on your work?
oh yeah, yeah, of course. I guess I do have some influences from um Wes Anderson animated film, especially Fantastic Mr. Fox. So it's because Wes Anderson, he's a live action filmmaker, so his approach to animated film is is not as traditional animated film. It's like usually an animated film where you'll find them like the character expression very exaggerated, when like sort of like a over the top kind of movements and expressions. But with Wes Anderson animated film, like you can see a performer and the characters is more likely in tone with live action performance. So this is like it's actually like it's gave a fresh view to stop to animated film, and it speaks a lot to me because I do have a thing for realism in animation. Um, like I do like to use animation to express uh true emotions, not just like very that it doesn't need to be very over the top emotion in order to express how the characters feel. Um, And even with Spring Road Dream, like we do pay a lot of attention to details of the performance, of the subtlety of how the characters feel, and it's expressed through their body language. There's facial movement, which I really want to explore in animated film. Um, I guess one other influence I may have is through Michel Gondry film. Uh, Whereas like the way he used like element of magical realism in his film, like he's also used stop motion to like reanimate it in his live action film, which is very interesting. Like you don't question uh those elements, like why it's become animated. It just reflect how the characters feel perfectly, and that's how like I kind of like I think it's really influenced my filmmaking and how I like to approach filmmaking. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mai. I know you've been waiting quite a bit, Dominique. But I was wondering, how do you find the interview subjects in your film?
Yeah, so I think with this one, I think I tend to use the term personal documentary. And I think a big part of it is, we often have these like big, issues and events, but I feel like often something as simple as just asking your parents or your grandparents or someone close to you, like what was it like experiencing these things? Uh, I think that often creates like a nice opening to a lot of, very multi-layered subjects. So obviously, with the Vietnamese side, like, well, everything was through his family, and a lot of it for me was just kind of, getting to know them and hearing about the stories. And uh, for Folk Anand was a fisherman in Malaysia. Actually, I found him online somewhat. So there's this Facebook group of Vietnamese Americans who actually go back to Bidong Island, and they do these trips every now and then. And these are people who have passed through like the island and then were relocated in the US and then now kind of make visits back. And then I found the contact of a local fixer. So I contacted him and he took me to like a local kind of food stall there, which is where I met the fisherman and just kind of spoke to him. Uh, but yeah, so I think a lot of these things, I think like one thing nice to think that everyone's stories tonight or like this morning is just how kind of personal a lot of these things can be, whether you're like second generation or even me as the Malaysian, like my grandfather migrated from China here and like our country is only like 60 plus years old. So, like history, a lot of these big historical events are actually very personal and very easily accessible. So yeah, in terms of finding subjects, I think yeah, it's just kind of as simple as, asking people close to us, about their experiences growing up, maybe before we were around and trying my best to listen.
Okay, thank you, Dominique. And then also one last thing. What is the current status of Bidong Island today? Are there any challenges that lay ahead?
Uh, yeah, so for the most part, since the refugee camp closed, it's been largely abandoned. There's a local university that has a marine biology research center there. But otherwise, there's not really much going on. In I think recently they decided that they'll gazette it as a state park, but it's more for ecological reasons. I mean, it's a beautiful island. It got a lot of marine biodiversity. So for those reasons, uh, but you know, the whole history of it being, a refugee camp, and you have, I think, all in all, through the years, there are about 250,000 people who passed through, uh, and I think it's been up 2 to 3 decades. So that does pop up now and then in local news, but unfortunately, a lot of it is still quite negative. Uh, so I think part of the reason I wanted to kind of do this as well was just like getting to meet Kwa and his family. It was really humbling just to see that, these are such wonderful people and they're given a chance, like a second chance, to start anew somewhere else. And they're doing so well, such wonderful people. And like, Kwa and I met at college and he's, doing really well for himself. But it's kind of unfortunate, like for me as a Malaysian, to kind of see the way we view it as a country. When it pops up now, often people point to it as this example of like, oh, back then, we opened our borders and we took these people in, and people kind of abused our kindness, and just like an influx of people. So I think with the film, I just kind of wanted to highlight a more positive aspect that, actually, all in all, the effects weren't actually that bad. And, when you actually give people this chance, they can do really well for themselves, for the countries that they're relocated in as well. So, yeah, so I mean, I think now that it's gazetted as a state park, I think they're going to encourage more tourism as well. So I think hopefully, you get more people kind of looking into the history of it as well, and maybe from a more, diverse perspective rather than a more nationalistic perspective.
Okay, thank you, Dominique. And I wanted to thank everybody here for taking part in our Q&A for Storms and Silver Linings today. Brandon Soon, Neil Henze, Bridget Leahy, Maylin Lei, Quinwin Lei, Mai Vu, and Dominic Teo for all your respective films. Congratulations on making it to the 20th anniversary of Viet Film Fest. And thank you for sharing your films with all of us. Viet Film Fest continues virtually through Sunday, October the 15th. There are many other options available on in our schedule on our website, and please feel free to donate at vietfilmfest.com. On behalf of all our filmmakers and all of us at Viet Film Fest, thank you for watching, and we hope to see you very soon. Thank you.